Hello again, I'm Norm Abram and welcome back to the new Yankee Workshop. This season we've been looking at programs recorded in earlier years to bring you interesting and challenging projects we think you'd like to see again. Today we look at a program called Wooden Trays. We found some old trays in an antique shop. One was so crude we thought it must have been used perhaps in a chicken coop to hold feed for the hens. But it was showing lots of age, and we thought it would look great serving fancy tidbits and cool drinks at a party. We imagined it would be easy to build and look great made from some of our reclaimed pine timber. The other tray turned out to be a bigger challenge. It's a sort of butler's tray. The original was made out of mahogany and fitted with brass hardware. Now we knew that we would never find stock brass hardware to make this tray. We would need to fabricate the corners and the handholds out of sheet brass. The wooden parts we decided we'd make out of cherry were straightforward enough. Two antique wooden trays, a simple, rustic, complicated, elegant duo you just might want to make. I'll show you how we do it next, right here in the new Yankee Workshop. One of the great places to find antiques on the island of Nantucket is right here off Center Street in a place called Weeds. Now we've had good luck here in the past finding pieces and then building them in the workshop. Let's see what George Davis has for us today. Boy, isn't this place great? And look at this. I think George is doing his duty keeping the deer population in check. Ooh, here's a nice table made out of oak planks. It actually sits on a cast iron base. Some more antlers for a candlestick stand. And over here, nice little hunt board with a display rack for some china. And I've actually built a project very similar to that. And a nice old pine sideboard. But here's the type of project I'm actually looking for. A nice serving tray. This one looks to be made out of teak. And it interests me that the corners are actually put together with bits of brass. I think it would be fun to get some brass and actually manufacture those parts. But I would really like to have another one, then I'd have a whole episode. Let's see if we can find one. Oh, look at these. Some old bread serving trays, a whole bunch of them. I wonder what George wants for those. $64 for this one, wow. Ooh, look at this. Now here's a tray. Boy. Made out of pine, and this is really old. Look at all the wormholes in the pine. It's been very well used. And it's simple. Just nailed together on the corners. Bottom is just a couple boards nailed on. This would give me the two projects, and maybe since I'm buying two, I can work out a good deal. That was a steal. Now let's get back to the workshop and see what we can do. Well, good morning. Come on over and take a look at our version of those antique trays that we found on the island of Nantucket. Now, we didn't intend it this way, but the antique trays couldn't have been more different in their level of craftsmanship. There was the rude and crude pine tray, and this one is actually a bit more refined than that antique, even though I used the toughest recycled pine I could actually find. But this is a fairly simple tray to build. With a table saw and a joiner, you can make this one. Now, our more formal tray is similar in every detail to the antique, except that I made mine out of cherry. Once I was able to actually locate some sheet brass, it was kind of fun to work with the brass and make all these pieces. This tray seems to use every tool in the shop. The table saw, the joiner, the scroll saw, the sanding center, routers, sanders, everything. Now, if you'd like to build a couple of these trays, a measure drawing is available with a materials list, and you'll hear more about that before the program ends. I want to get started today building our pine tray. Once again, we're going to turn to our collection of old timbers for the material to make our tray. There's an old pine board that came off a renovation project not far away. And on many occasions, you've seen me take boards like this, remove all the bits of iron, trim off the edges that are not good, and then run the boards through the surface planer on both sides until I end up with material like this. Now here are a couple boards I'm going to use for the bottom of our tray. This one even shows some of the paint still on it. And I'm going to leave that to add some character to the tray. Now the joint between the two boards is not very good, so I'm going to clean that up. And over here I have a bit of a dilemma. I have a crack. I'm not sure what to do. I have a couple choices. I could remove it by ripping on each side of it, gluing the boards back together, or I could leave it, which would actually add more character to the tray. And since the joint seems to be fairly tight, or the split, I think maybe I'll just glue it up. Now to improve these edges, I'm going to turn to my benchtop joiner. And this is a great tool in a small workshop. I don't think I'd use it to plane long lengths for a tabletop, however, but for small projects it's perfect. Before we use any power tools, let's take a moment to talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. Okay, that's good. Now, glue alone would probably be enough to hold the joint together, but I'm going to add a couple biscuits to strengthen it. So I'll put one here, one here, and one there. Okay, that takes care of making the slots for the biscuits. Now I want to prep this joint right here, and I think what I'm going to do is just break the board loose so I can get the glue in there. That's pretty good. And blow off any dirt that might still be in there. And for the glue to fix this split, I'm actually going to use a moisture-cured glue. And what this glue actually does is swells, it expands. I put it dry on one side of the joint and then just moisten the other side of the joint. Just spread an even coat with a little brush. The solvent for this glue is actually denatured alcohol. It's a little inconvenient, but boy, does this glue work well. Okay, that's that side of the joint. Now just a sponge. Moisten the other side of the joint. Okay, we'll just put that together like that for now and prepare our other joint. For the other joint, I'm going to use a standard Carpenter's yellow glue. First, I'll roll it on the edge. Now, this glue bottle actually meters the correct amount of glue into the slot. For biscuits, I've selected the largest size biscuit, a number 20 biscuit, and I like these containers because I found if you leave biscuits in the open or just in a bag that's not closed, the moisture in the air causes them to swell. And when they swell, they're difficult to put in the slot. This way, they stay thin and they fit right in. Okay, let's clamp it up. Okay, now let's see how this is going to clamp together. Now I don't want to put so much pressure that the joint just slides by. I just want to snug it up. Let the glue do the rest of the work. Okay, that's good. Now the split joint I'm going to leave just open a bit. And the other one I want it to be perfectly tight. That is good. Let's look at the corners on our prototype tray. On the antique original, they had just butt joints and nailed it together. I couldn't bring myself to do that. I wanted a stronger joint, so what I did is I made a dovetail joint. Here's a couple samples that I made in building the prototype. One piece has the pins, the other piece has the tail, and when they slide together, that makes a very strong joint. Now, if the sides were square to the base, it would be very easy to make these cuts. But because it's flared out at 30 degrees, every cut on the corner is a compound miter. I'm going to rough cut the side pieces to length, so I've set up my saw at a 15-degree bevel and set my miter gauge at 27 degrees, and I'll run one end of each piece. I mark each piece to length, measuring along the short point of the bevel cut. And then it's necessary to turn my miter gauge 27 degrees on the other side of 0 and cut each piece to length. Let's take a look at the mock-up of my corner, and you'll see how it fits against the table saw surface. The bottom edge needs to be beveled so that it'll fit the base of the tray, and the top edge has to be beveled so that it's parallel. That angle is 30 degrees, so I've tipped my saw to 30 degrees. We'll run the top edge first, then the bottom. With a slight adjustment to the rip fence, I'll run the other edge. The first part of the dovetail joint that I want to make is the pin piece, these being the pins. I want to remove this material. I have to run the piece through the saw with the bevel flat on the table, first making a cut on one edge, then turning it around and making a cut on the other edge. To hold the piece in that position, I had to make a jig that goes on my miter gauge. Piece of 2x4, cut at a 15-degree bevel, the same bevel that's on the end of each piece, a spacer the same thickness as the stock, and a little springboard which acts as a clamp. I put some marks on the jig to make the cut in the right place, slide it in position, make one cut on each end. To make the first cut on the opposite end, I angle the piece to the left and set it to a new alignment mark. To make the second cut on each end, I have to turn my jig around, set the piece to a new alignment mark, and run it through. Once again, to make the last cut, I'm going to reverse the piece, set it on the mark, run it through. Now with the blade tipped back to 90 degrees and lowered just a bit, I can nibble away the material between the cuts. The saw doesn't do a perfect job making the corner, but we can clean it up with a good sharp chisel. Here I've laid out the tails on the corresponding pieces, and I'm just going to cut those out using my dovetailing saw. I think it's faster. Well, let's see how that fits. It's going to be a little snug. I'll do the additional trimming with a chisel. That's good. Now's a good time to sand the inside face of all the side pieces. Now I'm going to clean up the saw cut along the top edge of each piece. I've tipped the fence on my joiner to 30 degrees. To assemble the joints, I apply glue to every gluable surface on both sides, and then just slide it together like that. Now, because of the angle on these pieces, it would be very difficult to clamp it. So I'm going to install a couple brads to hold it in place while the glue cures. The blank for the bottom of the tray is dry enough now that we can size it. The first thing I want to do is scrape off the excess glue, and you can see how this glue foamed out of the joint. It's really a good filler. And we'll clean it up with our sander. Now let's take another look at our prototype. I ease the edges of the base with a 1/4 inch rounding over bit at my router station. Here's the base for the one we're building today. to attach the base to the sides, I'm going to use some screws, and I'm going to pre-drill for the holes. I'm going to have one screw at the center of each side, and that hole can just be drilled straight through. But the end holes of each side, I'm first going to drill through, and then I'm going to elongate the hole a bit to allow for some expansion. Now, with the base carefully clamped to the sides, making sure that it's centered, I can attach it with some 1-inch screws. Now, to ease the edges of the sides, I'm just going to use my block plane to round it over. Then I'll give it a little bit of sanding, and then it's off to the finishing room. Well, let me show you the parts for our cherry tray. Here's the sheet brass, which I actually found in the yellow pages under a listing for brass. Now, it's a little bit thicker than the one that was used on the antique original, but it's still fairly easy to work. Now, over here I have a board that I'm going to use for the bottom. The bottom's only 1/4 of an inch thick, so I'm going to resaw this in half and plane it down. And when I open the two pieces up, I get this book-matched effect, which is kind of nice. Here's the end pieces, some 1/2-inch thick cherry, and here's the long side pieces and a couple templates. I'm going to start with the end pieces, just setting the template even with the bottom edge and tracing the outline. The top edge of the piece I'll be able to cut here at the bandsaw. The hand hole will go to the scroll saw. At the scroll saw, after drilling a hole in the hand hole area, I can thread the saw blade through, bring it up to the holder, lock it in place, give it the tension it needs, set down a hold down to keep the wood tight against the table, bring a little blower over, and cut it out. Here I'm using my oscillating spindle sander to clean up the inside of the hand hole. Then I'll put on a larger drum and do the top of the end pieces. The next thing I want to do is split this 1x10 to make the bottom for the tray. I'm going to use this tool known as a resaw. It's really a bandsaw with a very wide blade with carbide tips. Cuts through the hardest wood, no problem. To remove the saw marks and plane the pieces to uniform thickness, I'm going to turn to my portable surface planer. Now I can edge glue the two pieces together. No biscuits here, the panel is actually too thin. We'll clamp it up, let this cook overnight, and we'll easily finish this tray tomorrow. Well, good morning. I got started today making some rabbets in the long side pieces to receive the ends. And to do that, I've set up a stop block on my fence, which will determine the shoulder cut, and I'm just using my saw blade to nibble away the material. Now I've switched to my stacked dado head cutter, and I'm using the two outside blades, which gives me a 1/4 inch width, which is perfect for the cherry panel, which is going to be in the bottom of the tray. I'll run a groove in all 4 pieces. For the assembly, a little bit of glue on each side of the joint. The bottom panel sits in loose, no glue there. You just put all the pieces together and tack it with some brads. Well, now it's time to start fabricating the bits of brass, and I'm going to start with these top corner pieces. So I've set up my bandsaw with a guide fence and a bandsaw blade that's 1/8 inch wide and 14 teeth per inch, the general purpose bandsaw blade. Now, I would have liked a little bit thinner brass. This is a 1/16 inch thick, but it works fine and the blade cuts right through it. I plan to get all 4 corner brackets out of this piece. I've reset the fence so it's 9/16 of an inch from the blade, and I've put a stop mark right here, 9/16 back from the blade. I'll cut in, stop short, then cut in from the other side. Get one, then another one, and another one. Each will be a little shorter, then we'll trim the legs to length. For the brass that surrounds the hand holes, I've made a plywood template, and I'll lay it out on the brass just using a permanent marker. I'll cut the outside on the bandsaw, and I'll cut the inside on our scroll saw. To refine the edges of my piece, I'm using my sanding center to just remove the marks that I made. I've also set this table so that it tips in just a bit. It'll give a slight back cut to the piece, this being the face side, so that it'll fit tighter in the mortise I make later. Now my little scroll saw here can easily stand up to this brass. Now I'm ready to make the mortises for the bits of brass, and I'm going to start with these corner pieces. They're a little wider than the wood, so I'll just center it by eye. Then take a sharp utility knife and score the end points. Now I'll remove the bulk of the material using my router, which is set up with a 1/2 inch mortising bit, and then I'll clean the rest of it up with a good sharp chisel. To make the mortises to receive the brass that goes around the hand holes, I've clamped the piece in position, and once again I'm using a sharp utility knife to score the outline. This one's a little trickier to do because of the curves, but basically I'll remove most of the material with the router and clean it up with some sharp chisels. Wherever I'm going to attach the brass with a screw, I first drill a through hole, then I'm going to make a countersink to recess the screw head. Now I've switched bits to a countersink bit, and this gives me a tapered hole for the screw head. Before I mortise the corners of the tray for these L angle brackets, I have to bend them. And I found to get the sharpest corner, the best thing to do is take a file, hold it at a 45 degree on the back side of the piece of brass, and keep running it through until it's about halfway through the thickness. Then, if I take a pair of smooth jaw pliers and just line it up on the score that I just made, they bend into a nice sharp corner. Now all the pieces are held in place with some 3/8 inch brass screws. And one of the last things I want to do is trim the inside of this hand hole so it's flush with the wood. And to do that, I'm just going to use my flush trimming bit in my router. Okay, now that takes care of trimming these top corners flush. Now I'll just sand the sharp edges off, and we're ready for the finishing room. Boy, were we happy to see this product come along. It's a wipe-on polyurethane. It gives you the look of a hand-rubbed oil finish, yet you get the protection that's offered by a polyurethane. It's applied a lot like an oil. You just simply put it on a rag and wipe it on. I like this technique because I can get into the corners easily, and there's no brush marks left behind. I'll put on a coat, let it dry for 3 or 4 hours, sand it with some 220 grit paper, dust it off, and put on another coat. 3 coats usually does the job. Well, after putting a couple coats of that wipe-on polyurethane on our trays, they're looking pretty good. And I think they're going to be very useful around the house. Now, next time we're going to build this table. We found the antique in the low country of Georgia. It's made from recycled pine, and it has its own Lazy Susan. Maybe that's why they call it a carousel table. I'll show you how to build one next time, right here in the new Yankee Workshop.
order a home video or a measured drawing of the project you've just seen, please call 866-545-9708. Additional information is available at newyankee.com.